2023, and I'm calling the regular meeting of the Finance Committee to order at this time, and thank everyone for being here. I think that as I look at the screen, and I'm going to call attendance in just a moment, that Alicia has not joined us and Kathy is not going to be able to join us today, as it turns out, but we're otherwise ready to proceed. This meeting is being held by Zoom, and members of the public have access to the meeting and by Zoom, and but everybody who is watching should be advised that this meeting is being recorded both for visual and audio purposes. So you should be aware that the meeting will be recorded and of course available to the public later also through the town website and YouTube channel. So having said that, what I'd like to do is just make sure that everybody who's on the committee can hear me and be heard. So I'll just go through the list. Anna?
Yep, I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Lynn?
Present.
Bob?
Here.
Matt?
Present.
Bernie?
Present.
Kathy is not able to join us, and we don't have any indication as of yet that Alicia is with.
I've reached out to her.
And I noticed that there are two members of the public present. The plan for this meeting, just so we can get the be clear to everybody, is the agenda is going to be in the order that it is presented as posted, which means we're going to start with public comment. Then we're going to go to the reparations discussion. And after that, there's a very brief presentation that Athena is going to make to us about the surplus property, real property. It's not going to be a real discussion today, but she's just going to give us a background information about it. And then I think that Dave Zomack is going to present and be available for a later meeting in which there'll be more discussion about it. And then the remainder of the time we will, that's available up until 3 o'clock, which is kind of a hard stop for several people who are on the committee to start a discussion of the rental registration fee schedule. There was a report from last night's CRC meeting, which we only received this morning. So the committee has not had a lot of time with it. So, so the committee, any questions about the agenda or the order? So if there are none, then I guess why don't we see if there's any requests for public comment. Any member of the public who is entitled to make a presentation to the committee for up to 3 minutes about any issue that is related to a matter that is or might come before the Finance Committee. There's no limitation that it has to be related to the agenda at all. And I see one hand that has gone up. So if there's a second person requesting, let me know, but Renata is now available. And so I will ask Renata, welcome to the meeting, and Renata Shepard, and please identify yourself and indicate at least what that you're an Amherst resident and what section of town you live in. You don't have to go further than that. And then please offer your comment.
Hi, good afternoon. Renata Shepard from Justice Drive in Amherst. Last night, CRC outdid themselves. All these months of discussion about making permit fees fair went out the window. I am disheartened with their decision to propose keeping the permit fee base at $250 and capping larger properties at $700 in order to simplify fees for applicants. We are not so stupid not to understand that 3 or 4 different fees relates to property size. $700 is nothing for large properties, but 250 plus inspections is a hardship for me and many other small landlords. CRC did not consider my per bedroom proposal, so I am offering you another idea. 50 for owner-occupied parcels, 75 for condos, 100 for single-family homes as base fees. Add 50 or 75 per additional unit per parcel. Increase the cap for larger properties. Other towns cap at $2,500 or more, and only charge 15 or 25 or 50 per yearly permit, depending on the town. And that includes Boston, which is a big city. I'm urging you not to accept a $250 fee across the board. This is extremely unfair to smaller landlords. And I also urge you to have a full board, a full committee, before making a final vote for this proposed fee. I should probably share some math with you in hopes that you can understand my point. My 2-bedroom condo is rented to a wonderful family for 10 years. Current rent is $1,540 for a 2-bedroom. It may or may not increase to $1,600 or $1,700 next June. We'll have to see. Mortgage and insurance is about $800. Condo fee $400 started in January. Property taxes $300 a month. It will go up because it's Amherst. Repair, maintenance, cushion, about $60. Not enough, but I can't do more. So that's a $20 loss per month. And wait, I forgot all the fees you want me to pay. I could raise my rent to market value, $2,200 or $1,300, displace my beloved tenants, rent it to 3 or 4 rowdy students who will destroy my property and cause me to become a nuisance property and incur even more fees. So those are the, options. You are shooting affordable housing in the foot. What is next? Rent control? Thank you very much.
Hey, Renata, before you leave, you had submitted a comment to the council, and but I don't know if your recommendation that you made at the beginning of this presentation about the amount of the fees was included. You did share some of the other information that was that I remember from the what you had sent to the council. If you could at least send it to me as the chair of the committee, or however you choose to do it, but at least to me, what your recommendation was, it would be very helpful for the record to have that recommendation available if you're comfortable with it.
For your direct email with that?
Yes, you can just send it to my direct email, my council address, steinberg@amherstma.gov, and I will share it with the rest of the committee before we do not anticipate that we're going to be making any recommendations today, so there's time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see anyone else in the audience who's asked to make public comment. So with that, I'm going to turn to the next agenda item, which is the AHRA, Amherst African Heritage Reparation Assembly recommendation that was presented to the council on Monday night, and there was some discussion on Monday. I wanted to start today's discussion by, since the resident members of the committee were not present and the council members had a few more days to think about it, to see if there are questions about the report itself. And I'm not specifically at this point excluding it down to what was referred to the committee. The rest of the discussion, we will want to focus only on part 3, what was referred to the committee, but the entire report has context. So if there are any questions, or Michelle, if you have anything that you would like to say in introduction, look for hands, and give you a moment to raise hands and see. You, Michelle? Just
I'm really just here to, can you hear me?
yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'm just here to answer any questions that you might have about the recommendations. When it comes time for you all to discuss them as a committee, I will be leaving the meeting, but I'm always available. So please feel free to reach out if you have, additional questions that come up as you have your discussion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any general questions that anyone has before we get into Lynn?
This may be exactly what we're going to discuss, but I would like to make sure that we review the various proposed ways of funding the project from the report. And also, are we going to go ahead and discuss other possible ways of funding?
I think that is our subject, because what we are charged by the council to review is Section 3. And so I think anything that you just described would be included in the Section 3 discussion, which is where we're going to narrow to after we make sure there's no additional questions that are unrelated to Section 3. Anna?
Yeah, this is more a question for Michelle. I'm curious if there was a process to, it's such a long report that I don't want to say I want like a legal opinion on the full thing, but I'm curious if there was a process to get a legal review done on the recommendations in the report, just to figure out, I think some of them require enabling legislation, some of them to kind of figure out what the level of current or like level of legality under current law is, and then where it would need special legislation versus where it's not necessarily doable under either. And I don't know that that last category is true at all, but I'm curious if a lawyer had looked at this at all. And because I think that as we go through recommendations, I'm trying to figure out which is the cart and which is the horse, right? So do we want to figure out which ones we want to kind of prioritize first as a committee and then seek a legal opinion on those? Or does that not matter to the committee? And that's fine too. That was a super clean question, I know, but basically I'm just asking if this has been reviewed by legal counsel in any way.
Thanks, Anna. So in the appendix of the report, you'll see the extent of legal advice that I have received as the chair of the AHRA. So
Okay.
I'm not sure if Town Manager Bockelman has consulted with the town attorney, but just to kind of back up and say, as we were developing these options, we were in communication with Sean at the time, with the town manager, to sort of try to understand, what the limitations might be based on the original legal opinions that we received. And in the end, I decided that instead of going and asking Paul again to do another legal opinion based on these options, that we first allow the council to decide which options they'd like to pursue, and then, ask for legal counsel based on that. So that's kind of the general. Does that answer the question?
It really does. I think that's what I was trying to figure out is like, do we do the legal opinion first or do we do the council decide, like that kind of thing? So thank you. And so just to clarify your point, you're saying that at least the first kind of run through of this was vetted by town staff and then, but not necessarily the final draft. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so the three options were developed in consultation with Sean and the town manager. We had a meeting that where we reviewed the options that we were thinking about, and in fact, the town manager is responsible for option B, which I thought was very creative. So we sort of just threw some ideas around. I mean, I guess I should say that what's most important from our perspective, what was most important was to, one, be able to start pursuing initiatives sooner than 10 years and now as possible, and to have some meaningful amount of funding to do that on an annual basis. So those are kind of the two goals that we have. And we were very sort of open to how we would meet those goals.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bernie? Please
Bernie,
unmute.
you're muted.
All right, now,
Bernie.
now I can be clear. I just want to be clear on who the target population is for the reparations. I know the report has 3 general categories. Folks who have who've descended from persons who were enslaved in Amherst, folks who are descended from persons who were enslaved elsewhere, and then just about everybody else, if I've got that right. And what I'd like to get clear on is how tied does a person have to be to Amherst before they can be considered for reparations? We have a substantial transient population of, folks who are here for 1 to 4 years and they move on. And while they're here, are they considered eligible, or, this is a tough, I know this is a tough question, but I just want to get clear on who the targets are here.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's really important. The eligibility piece is something that we were charged with discussing and reporting on. But the expectation, I think, is we provided some guidance, and we hope that a successor committee will be formed, and that guidance will be used as a reference. But, depending on whether we're talking about programmatic initiatives versus like a direct benefit, for example, like a down payment for a home, or even a cash payment that would require special legislation, I think the eligibility criteria is going to vary. So I think when it comes to the more programmatic initiatives, they'll be more inclusive than maybe some of the other initiatives, let's say, that would involve housing and that may look to historical harms that have occurred in the community as a way of defining the eligibility for that kind of benefit. I think it's gonna really kind of happen when the hopefully the successor body begins actually looking at implementing the recommendation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just, just as a historian, as someone who is interested in ancestry, my own and others, and how that works, it's a given that it's going to be very difficult for someone to trace their heritage back to someone who was enslaved because of the vagaries of record keeping and the non-person status that enslaved individuals had. So, so that's why the eligibility question becomes critical too, to make sure that you're not defining this down to a point where it's impossible for someone to demonstrate eligibility.
Absolutely, Bernie, and we discussed that a bit on Monday night during the presentation. The difficulty in providing the documentation that would be required under a more limited eligibility, framework. So that's all going to be needing discussion as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other general questions? Yeah, Lynn. You're muted now.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that in looking at the three options for the financial way of dealing with the fund, the goal is to have some money that you can do, that the town can do at the recommendation of a committee, that the town can do things with sooner rather than later, so that there would be a way to do this without waiting till we fund the full fund and live off of the interest.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And so I think that's why, option B is I'm not going to advocate for any one option, but I think option B was really creative because it helps us to, it continues growing the fund, but it also helps us to begin pursuing these initiatives now. And so, and that $100,000 that we identified was based on, looking at other initiatives, other sort of projects and ways that we could partner with other, aligned initiatives that are already happening in the community. We felt that that number would be meaningful enough to make some real, reparative change.
So can I just pursue further, Andy?
Sure.
Because several of the concepts that you've talked about in the report in terms of what you would like to pursue, let me stick to one that I don't think gets into whether or not CPA or CDBG money, but there is a strong group of people in Amherst who would like to see a youth center. Okay, and you mention in your report a youth center. So this is the third committee that we've seen a youth center recommended from. And the town manager, at least in one version of the ARPA money, which is the COVID money from the federal government, had put aside $500,000 or $500,000 for beginning to set up a youth center. I want to make sure that I'm saying that. So your concept would be that AHRA might also come to the table with some money for a youth center. Is that what I'm hearing in terms of wanting to do something more immediate rather than wait till the fund is fully funded? And let me just say, in that case, I don't think there's any legal barrier to that, but it would end up being a combination of money that might come from ARPA money and might come from the AHRA fund in some way. Is that an example?
Yes, I think, through our consultation process, youth programming certainly rose to the top. I don't think we thought about using the funding that would be available to us for like the creation of a facility, for example. I think we thought more about programmatic or other costs that would be incurred as the youth center was developed.
Right.
So I do think that that is absolutely a great example. And I also just want to be sure that, the consultation with that successor body continues so that we don't become sort of split, like, oh, this was recommended, and so let's take that $100,000 out of there and put it here. Just ensuring that we continue to have that consultation or that collaboration with the successor body. But that certainly did rise to the top for our funding priorities.
Okay. But I could go on and push on this, but let's leave it there for now. Thank you.
Matt?
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Michelle and all for the good conversation. So I apologize if this is duplicative. I just want to make sure I understand the essence of the question. We have a town council action last year to add essentially all the cannabis money up to a certain cap every year until we hit 2 million, with the eventual plan being that 2 million would then generate interest and other revenue, and the revenue from that 2 million would be used for paying for programs. And the question before us now is, how can this be structured so that the successor body has money to spend sooner than the 2 million to spend before we get to that 2 million point? Is that right? How can that be established?
Yeah, and it even seems, you know, when I think back to the original commitment that we made, you know, given that we now have this information that we do and the recommendations that we've made, the idea is that we accelerate the timeline so that we can begin, you know, pursuing initiatives now and not waiting until we get to that full 2 million, which is where, you know, option one comes from. Well, let's get there now, you know, by moving money from one bucket to another bucket. And again, it would remain as an endowment, so the principal stays intact, and just using the investment to come off of that.
So
Does that get it?
Yeah, that helps. And so then I guess my question is, without changing the funding scheme, it would take longer to get to the 2 million, but without changing the funding scheme, is AHRA / you know, kind of, or you, or is there an openness to sort of giving discretion over using the funds that are in the account now and the annual amount of funds that go in, you know, discretionary? So it would take longer to get to the 2 million, but you would have money to spend on an annual basis. Is that idea on the table? Is that something folks are considering?
Is the question, so yes, like with option B, it would grow the fund more slowly, but it would give us access immediately to funding. So that was sort of like a middle ground to say, okay, you know, we don't know what's going to happen with cannabis tax revenue. So if we're continuing to model off of that, I think we do have to consider, well, what is the least amount that we want to, if option B were pursued, that we want to allocate to reparations on an annual basis. If the cannabis tax revenue goes down to $50,000, if we're still modeling off of that, then, you know, we're going to be not only growing the fund very slowly, we're going to have little access to funds to pursue the initiative. So I do think that should be part of the discussion that the Finance Committee considers in terms of the source of the funding.
Right. I have more questions, but I see a bunch of hands going up, so I'll sit back for a sec.
Bob?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, and Paul, maybe you can answer this. How much money do we have currently in the reparations fund, and what are we projecting to be the cannabis revenues over the next year or two?
I can't answer that question. I can find out for you, certainly.
Okay.
Both of those
I
things.
just I think it's important that we understand what the base, you know, what our baseline is, before we start talking about options.
Yeah, Michelle is right that the cannabis revenues is dropping. So, but I can get that information for you.
Great, thank you.
And Bob, I can just add that I think when I checked with Sean just before he left, the fund has maybe like 410 or 413, something like that in it from the past 2 allocations that have occurred.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that there was one other piece to this I was going to add when we get to questions later, and so we'll come back to it so it gets on the list. But the Cannabis Control Commission has had discussions at various times about licensing what I sometimes call cafes, where people can buy and use marijuana in a social setting similar to going into a bar and drinking alcohol. And at one point, Amherst was listed as one of the communities, one of the municipalities that might be a pilot in such program. I don't know if that's still operative or not, but if that happened, would there be additional cannabis fees, and what's the likelihood of it happening? And I don't know if there's any, Paul, if you have any assessment of those questions, but you don't have to answer that today either.
Yeah, no, we are open to that. We don't have regulations that would allow it. We have to do some regulatory work internally with our own bylaws. We've been identified as one of those communities, as you mentioned, Andy. And if we did open some one or more in town, that would generate more revenue for the cannabis tax because there'd be more sales.
Okay, going back to the group, Lynn.
I think Bernie's before me.
Bernie, do you have some? Go ahead. You have to unmute again. Yep.
Yeah, I just took my microphone off. Back on. Just as a remark on the cannabis cafes, I think we need to think very hard before we put more folks who may be somewhat inebriated on the streets in Amherst. It might not be the best thing. Michelle, I just want to go back to, because I think I've heard you say, and I want to understand this, that it's important that we have a successor committee in place before a lot of decisions and details get discussed. Is that correct? Michelle?
So did you hear the question? Or?
Well, my concern is that we don't get ahead of ourselves on this. If the reparations committee believes that there needs to be a committee in play, a decision-making body in place that can help direct the implementation, that we want to be careful that we leave things open for them. And I congratulate the committee on being largely descriptive and not prescriptive in their recommendations. That I think makes the whole thing more workable. But I would like to be able to, before we have a discussion of, say, a youth center, I'd like to see that there's a committee in place to say, yes, it is a priority, and the youth center gets balanced against, say, using monies from the fund for soft seconds so people can buy housing. Those are decisions that are going to have to be made, because we're going to deal, no matter what we do, we're dealing with a limited pool of funds. And the other thing I would like to see going forward with this is that before we do something, it's subject to a make or buy assessment, because I think for a number of these initiatives, it might be better, as council pointed out as well, a minority business enterprise that's organized as a not-for-profit corporation could have greater degrees of freedom in implementing this stuff than the town might have.
Absolutely. I really appreciate those comments. And I think, recognizing the importance of that successor body being able to, as you said, balance the various priorities against what is already out there for the town as a priority, and what the community needs is really important. I don't think that necessarily means that the town council or the finance committee, I think we're the timing of looking at acceleration or finding some way to begin this process now is good timing, because without any access to funding, then the successor body really isn't necessary to some extent. So I think that it's good timing all around.
Okay. Need to pause for a moment for a couple of reasons. One is Alicia joined us about 5 minutes ago, and it should show that, but I want to make sure that Alicia can hear us and we can hear her.
Hi, yes, I can. Thank you, Andy.
Okay, and just so you know, what we're doing is we divided the AHRA discussion into two parts. This is I'm going to try and cut it off in a couple minutes, is general questions about the report that don't have to specifically relate to section 3, which was what it was referred to the Finance Committee. But I am cutting it off in a minute or two because we want to turn to what was assigned. And the goal for today is to identify questions, some of which have already been brought up, that need to be considered as we analyze question 3, things, the information that we need for the next meeting, and a list of issues to help us define the discussion for the next meeting, where we're really going to be focusing on the charge that was given to our committee. So, Alicia, if you have any general questions or comments about the report, this is the time, because we're going to narrow it in a moment. Lynn?
Yeah, one of the questions I'd like to ask is, if the fund was fully funded at about at 2 million, what would be the percentage of interest rate we would expect to be able to draw on annually? And I think the place where we might look to a comparable would be the library fund, in terms of how much they draw off of it annually for operations. And then an additional question that goes along with that is, if we use these funds, can we use these funds for program, operation, and capital? Is there any restriction on what the funds can be used for based on how we initially set up the fund? Do you want me to be adding these? This is where you want to start adding questions.
And make sure you have those recorded. See if Michelle has anything further. Michelle, your hand has been up to the entire time, which makes
Oh,
it
I
tough for me
apologize.
to know,
I can never.
when you want
No,
to be recognized.
no, I'm gonna lower it, and I think that Lynn's questions are great, and I think they're probably for Paul and others to explore further. But I'm gonna lower my hand. And I would love to know if Alicia, before I leave the meeting, just to make sure that Alicia or any other committee member that hasn't asked, that might have a question, has the chance to do that.
Alicia?
Thank you, Andy. I haven't really thought, I haven't been as thoughtful as I would like to be in how to formulate this exact question, but I'm wondering about how you envision the funds will be used, and like the replenishing of funds. So like, once we have hit what we deemed for it to be like a like fully operating reparations fund, and we're utilizing the funds, is there like a reimbursement vision, or do we have to be over the certain mark before we start distributing funds? Or I'm wondering how we expect to be using the fund.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it will depend largely on which of these options or some other option the town council ultimately goes with. So I think, in terms of replenishment, if we do keep it set up as an endowment, then the principal will always remain. So whether you move 2 million, the balance to get us to 2 million now, or whether we grow it more slowly, that money will stay in the fund, and we'll be using the investment income off of that on an annual basis, which gives us a really powerful sort of sustaining, it can sustain us long into the future. And I expect that this, as the community comes forward more to voice what is needed. And as some of these initiatives are beginning to, manifest, that how the money is used this is definitely a live, it's not static at all. It's definitely a living body of recommendations. Does that
Okay.
answer the question, Alicia?
Yes, that is helpful. I think it just is also helpful for me in terms of thinking of what the options are to understand like how it will be used.
Yeah, I think the expectation is that that successor body will get up and running and take what we have provided in our report and begin to sort of focus in a little bit more than we have. So we tried to provide, based on what we heard from the community, some funding priorities in areas that we understood in that process to be important for the community. But I think the successor body really is going to have the opportunity to hear more from the community and understand sort of what is needed in order to fulfill the reparative goals that we have.
So I think that what I would like to do now, just managing time and knowing we have a 3 o'clock hard stop time, is that Lynn has a document, and what it is questions that I received from other counselors were 1 through 6 on the document. And so because as you recall, at the end of the council meeting, Lynn requested that if there were questions of the finance committee, they be forwarded to me and to Athena. And so that was what 1 through 6 are, is things that were received by that route. And then Lynn has added 3 others based, I believe, on the discussion that we've just had. What we're going to try and do is continue on, and the purpose of this is to make sure that we end this meeting with an organized list of additional information that we wish to obtain in order to do the work that's been assigned to us, or issues that are recommended for discussion at the by the committee as we work through our assignment. So what we're trying to do now is to look at that list. I'm not suggesting in any means removing questions that were posed from the council in the 1 through 6. I'm looking to add to them because that was, I think, the understanding with the council. So does that make sense? Anybody object to what I just said?
Andy, my hand is up. It's not an objection. It's a question.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Is your next in order? And Michelle, I don't know, your hand is still up. Are you looking to be recognized? Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
So I think my question is looking for modeling. So can we model out the impact if we give the successor body some discretionary percentage of funds or amount of funds to use on an annual basis? So, it slows down that accumulation up to 2 million, but it also allows them to start, investing in programs sooner than 10 years out.
Okay. I want to say, I will mention one other thing, that Kathy Shane was planning to be here for the first part of our meeting today, but she was down in New York for family reasons, and she determined this morning that she was not going to be able to join us. she has a list of questions that she was going to add to that would sort of be in the council questions as well as member section. But she may have additional questions that were not there. And I thought of it as you were speaking because I think that one of her questions is pretty much exactly what you just put in, Matt. Bob, on to you.
Yeah, I had a it's more of a question of it's kind of a follow-up to what Bernie raised the issue how this fund is administered. I mean, especially if one of the suggestions in part 3 is to establish a charity based on, you know, for contributions from the public. And how would that be administered relative to the stabilization or the fund, which presumably has to come through the town council for authorization to spend? Is that correct? I mean, would we be setting up a separate pot of money that, I mean, who would be the decision makers on how to spend that charity money?
I think I'm going to leave that, get that onto the list of questions, but also reflect on the fact that when we set this up originally, I think that what Sean had proposed was that having everything remain in the enterprise fund, not the and then come out of the stabilization fund rather, and then come out of the stabilization fund would require council approval for each time that there's an expenditure so that it remained within council control to make a final decision. So that was how I understood his recommendation.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. The reason I asked this question is if we had a charity, again, I don't think we have to answer it now, but if we had a charity, how would that be administered? How would those funds be administered?
Could I
So-
jump in real quick just to answer, just to give a little bit of background about what I learned regarding that, Andy?
I think that at this point, what we're trying to do is not answer questions, but to pose questions.
Okay. Well, I can send a note just because I do have some, Pamela Young did some pretty great research on how the Friends of model might work. So I can send that along to you, Andy, and you can share it with the committee, and that might be helpful for Bob's question here.
Yeah, that would be helpful. The list that we're developing obviously is a public document. It's being developed on the screen that you can't see because you're attached by phone, but it will be available. And, you know, it'll give you a chance to think about the questions that are being posed and the issues that are being posed in advance of the next meeting.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bob?
I don't have anything else. Thanks.
Okay. Bernie?
Thanks, Andy. The fund that we're talking about, the $2 million, that is a discrete fund over and above or in addition to, is that a discrete fund over and above any additional resources we can bring to bear, like CDBG money, like community preservation money? Or does any contribution from the CPA or the CDBG pool or any other pool, does that count towards the 2 million?
Okay. Seeing no other hands from committee members up at the moment. I had thought about a couple of things. One is in relation to option one, since at this point, no options are off the table because we're not voting today on anything. It was our understanding. What would be an estimate of the amount of time that it would take to repay the fund if we did what was suggested in option one, and what effect that would have on other stabilization funds?
Andy, I believe that question is pretty much up here.
Maybe you're right.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Matt has his hand up, as does Michelle.
Yeah, Andy. Oh, can I go ahead, Andy?
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I since you raised that, I do have a question about I guess it's option 3, which I don't support, I don't think, but you know, that's I don't need to say that right now. We're just talking about all the options that are on the table. But I would be interested in any consequences to implementing option 3 in terms of bond rating, availability of that capital that we were talking about moving. So just sort of, you know, again, sort of an analysis of, you know, what would be the implications on the other accounts if we were to pursue option 3.
Michelle has her hand up, Andy.
Michelle,
I don't. You know what? If you guys don't mind, I think this has been a great discussion. It sounds like you're going to start to move on. I'm going to jump off. My hand function here on the phone is just wild. But thank you so much. And I'll look forward to continuing to follow these questions and get you whatever information I can to support answering them.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank
Okay.
you. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. And I'll see you guys next time. Have a good
Okay.
weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
I think the
And
other
just specificity on that number 14 that you just put in there, Lynn. Just, I mean, I was obviously there's I feel like if that question is read as is, the answer is they become less, which that's not quite the nuance I was trying to tease out there. You know, so for example, bond rating, for example, you know, the overall fiscal health of the town. I don't want an answer that says the money will be less, because I was looking for a little bit more nuance than that.
And I guess that the last question I have was related to that in some ways, because the way I was phrasing it was, are there any legal risks to our bond rating, or comments from our accounting firm that we need to be aware of as we continue this discussion?
I'm going to combine the two, bond rating. It's the accounting firm or the you
well,
mean the
I was thinking that should we be asking, their name is now Markham, it used to be Melanson. Should we be asking whether they have any advice for us or whether our town attorney has any advice for us about any risks that we're should be aware of.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I have other questions, but to be honest, I think they're more based on the referral that was made to GOL. And that will be taken up by GOL.
yeah, I had left I had a question that I submitted to GOL
Okay.
also, as Lynn probably knows, and I was not bringing that up today because it's related to the committee charge and not to the financial piece that was referred to this committee.
Right.
So I think that under the circumstances, the only thing that I would certainly want to do is make sure that if Kathy had questions that she had intended to bring up today, that we keep the list open for that purpose. And therefore, if anybody else from the committee submits questions to me and to Athena, we can add them to the list too, to be totally fair. But Matt?
I'm just channeling Kathy from previous meetings. I mean, I know that she has a lot of questions about the mechanism for council approval before funds get distributed. I think that's probably not a question. I mean, that question is known, but it might be worth just explicitly adding it to the list for the sake of, you know, I think everybody on finance would like to know the answer to that question and sort of be comfortable with that.
So Paul, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so if I can throw in just to, I'm not sure if it's appropriate for me to put these are council questions, but I'd be remiss if staff weren't asking questions about the creation of another committee that needed support. Is there an existing committee that could take on the responsibilities of this function? And you know, what would the staffing needs of a new committee require? What kind of support would they need? And so I think we've got a lot of people managing lots of different committees, and when they see another committee getting created, they start to squirm a little bit.
Certainly want to leave that on because that gets into financial consequence of the cost in staff time.
Yep.
Of supporting another committee. So I think that may be a CRC question or a GOL question too. Okay, is there anything else? Or can we close this off and turn to the next agenda item?
And Andy, do you want me to send this to you and Athena or to the whole committee? It can get posted. I'll send it to Athena and she can post it.
Thank you.
Yeah, why don't you send it to Athena and to me, and then let us decide what to do. Because we also want to make sure that we get Kathy's questions, and then we can edit them in if they're to the extent that they're not already stated.
Andy, I believe Athena might have something to say. I think we actually have to post it now that it's been discussed.
We should post it, and if you have Kathy's questions, we can add Kathy's.
Okay, I will leave that to you, Athena, because you're the one who understands what you're tending to do on the OML requirements. Is there anything else that any members of the committee want to talk about right today regarding reparations? Otherwise, we have a couple other subjects to move to. Actually, I think we have 3, including next meeting planning. So seeing no hands, I'm going to assume that we're completed with that. The next item was that real property disposition was on the agenda, not for any substantial discussion today, but to sort of begin us preparing for real discussion within the next meetings. As you may recall, that was a matter that was referred to us by the council, and we're trying to see if we can get back to it and reach any conclusions before the end of the current term. And that's why, but Athena, you would plan to be called on at this point so that you could tell us about what you've been doing.
Thanks, Andy. I spoke with, so this was referred back to Finance Committee because in one of Finance Committee's previous reports, there was a recommendation to update the policy for our new form of government. The previous policy was adopted by the Select Board, I think in March 2018. And the way our form of government works, it just doesn't make sense to have that policy the way it was. It was very directive of the town manager and how the town manager brought surplus property to the Select Board and then the Select Board bringing it to town meeting for a vote. Now that we have an executive that's the town manager and can form his own advisory committees and so on at his own discretion before bringing recommendations about surplus property to the council, it didn't make sense to include a lot of those details in a new policy. So I've drafted this based on the conversation with Dave and Sharon. Some of the text that was in the old policy was rephrased from general laws, and so I've left in references to general laws and requirements that the council, the town comply with general laws, but not the text itself, so that if any of those change, we don't have to go back and change the policy. I also referred to 4 or 5 different cities and towns real property disposition policy in coming up with the requirements in regard to the town manager's report to the council, the information to be included in the report about properties that he would make a request to the council about. I think that's where I'm looking for some input from the committee about what they'd like to see there. And we also have a mechanism for public comment, a public hearing, and timelines there. Those are not required by law, but there was a public comment opportunity in the previous policy, and I think it makes sense to have a public notice and comment in the new policy. And then a quick note at the end: the disposition of town property requires a 2/3 vote by law, but if there is acceptance of the Mass General Law that affordable housing be allowed to be disposed of, or property to be disposed of for the purpose of affordable housing, that can be a majority vote, but the town would have to accept that general law.
Thank you. And for the rights of the committee, referred to Sharon as Sharon Everett, and she's an attorney at our law firm that represents the town. It's KP Law. So this is in our packet. It's not for was not intended for discussion today, but we wanted to give you kind of a preview and introduction. And if there are any general questions that you feel you can ask Athena now about what she just reported. Otherwise, the detail we want to do later. Matt?
Oh, well, I think it just kind of prompted me to ask a question because I know we kind of issued this charge and discussed this probably a year and a half ago or more. Are we anticipating, some action and moving forward on this in the next few months, or when, when should we expect it to hear more information about this?
Are you
The sur-
asking about
the
a
surplus
new
property.
draft? If, are you asking if the town's planning on bringing a request to the council or just a new draft of the policy?
Request to the council.
No, I think this was, the council and the finance committee had discussed at various points properties in town that were maybe costing the town for maintenance or weren't maintained. And so that's what prompted the council or the finance committee to start looking at this policy and think about how those properties might be disposed of if the town manager determines that they're no longer for public use, a good use of public property.
Right. And there was like talk of a committee being formed to start sort of compiling that list and reviewing that list. So I was just curious if there was any update or action heading towards that, and it's fine if that's still in the future. I just
No,
prompted.
there was, in the previous policy, there was an advisory committee that would advise the town manager. Because our form of government has changed, the town manager can form an advisory committee if he chooses, but it wouldn't need to be a public body. And it would be up to the town manager to determine who and how many people he wants to receive input from before he would make a request from the town council, a request to the town council to do anything with property. So what this new draft is focused on is what the council wants to see in the policy before it makes before it takes any action on a request from the town manager, rather than mandating how the town manager does his job, because the select board previously was the executive and they were more directive to the town manager. Now that the town manager is the executive, he has a little bit more discretion, a lot more discretion to figure out who he wants to consult and so forth before bringing a request to the council.
Okay.
Andy, I can't raise my hand, but I have a
Yeah, go
question.
ahead.
So Athena, this is the proposed substitute for the existing policy.
Correct.
And at some point, perhaps, which would be nice, before we finish the term of this council, would the finance committee be able to finish their discussion of this and refer it to the council for action before the end of December? That's the question I'm raising, because I just assume not let it languish and frankly get it off our plate.
Yeah, and that was my idea. That I knew this was a loose end, and I thought the finance committee might like to make a recommendation before the end of it. This current council's term, finance is pretty busy, so I think it just depends on how if we can get some good feedback from the committee, and then Dave and Sharon and I can look at that feedback and make changes to the policy before bringing it back to the committee so that they can make a recommendation. But in terms of the committee agendas, that's an Andy question.
Yeah. There's one biggie piece of property that may come up, and that is that if the Wildwood School is no longer being used as an elementary school and the school committee determines that they no longer need it for educational purposes, then it goes back to the town, and the surplus property question of what to do with that property becomes a significant issue. So just, alert us all to the possibility that some council sometime may be looking at that issue.
I'm looking at Paul to see how urgent he feels that is, but I don't imagine that it's an impending issue.
Yeah, that's a couple years away. Yeah.
So think we have nothing further today to discuss on it because this was in the packet. So we have an opportunity to look at it and give some thought and come back to it. So I think we've covered what we need to today, unless somebody else has a hand raised. I assume we can go on and to the next item.
Andy, if I can ask if the committee has questions or comments or any feedback about the policy, that they send it on to me and Dave so that we can work on a draft to bring back? Or do you want to save that for the next discussion?
No, that's fine. If anybody does have questions, I would appreciate having a copy too, but we
Thank
send
you.
it to Athena and Dave so that they can determine what's the best course of action if we're going to move this through. That would be helpful. Bob?
It would be helpful to see the current policy or the one that this is to replace. Just it would help me in reviewing it to see what we had in the past.
Sure. I'm sorry I didn't add that to the packet. I'll add it to the packet.
Great, thank you.
And Andy, when do you want any, or Athena and Andy, when do you want any questions by? I'm trying to keep moving this forward so that we finish it and get it to the council. I guess in December at the latest. We only have 4 meetings of the council between now and the end of the year.
I think we probably need to pull up the see if I can find unless you have it, the meeting planning document. It was in the
I don't see it in the.
I don't think it was in the packet. Hang
No,
on.
it's not. It's and I'd want to make sure it comes from you and or Athena so that we make sure we have the latest one.
Right, we do have an updated one. I'll add it to the packet.
Yeah, you updated it since I didn't update, and then you were going to work on mine. So I assume you have the most recent.
Yours had the same comments that mine had. So what we're looking at is on the 27th, fourth quarter and year-end budget reports. Again, the disposition policy, rental registration fees, AHRA, and then if streetlights is ready from TSO. But I'll add this to the packet so that everyone can see what's coming up. It's really after the 13th that things get really heavy. After financial indicators, the committee's going to start working on budget guidelines. And the surplus, I'm sorry, the supplemental appropriation requests that are coming on the 13th as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do the share screen now. Because I might have it somewhere in my, if this works. So did it appear or not?
It does not.
Yeah, I don't, I have it on my.
Perhaps to move this along, Andy, I'll just ask for comments by next Wednesday, this coming Wednesday. And so Dave and I can discuss a new draft and get it before the committee again whenever you're ready to take it up.
I think I now have it.
Oh, there we go.
So just so you know, and I was going to do this later, I'm not going to do it again. But to let you know that we have been doing this kind of planning again as we did last spring to try and think our way through the remainder of the year and see what today's agenda that we've touched on every thing except for the rental registration fees, which we're going to close with. Next week, we have a meeting scheduled, and at that point, Holly's going to be able to present the fourth quarter and year-end budget reports. And we are coming back to the surplus real property disposition policy and the other two items that we talked about already. And then if TSO has a recommended policy on streetlights at that point, we would be able to add that and come back if we wished. But we're really under the gun because, as you see, we're working along fairly quickly. By the 3rd, we anticipate that if free cash is certified, that there may be some opportunity to talk about the free cash. The free cash transfers really come out of town manager recommendations, and so that may not be available to us by the 3rd, what town manager's recommendations are. But we're getting towards the point of thinking about the budget guidelines. So the question came up if we had the opportunity, in order to make the budget guideline discussion a little bit easier to manage for the committee, whether we wanted to have an initial discussion early on about any of the issues having to do with budget guidelines that we might be able to sort of begin to discuss, since we've had pretty much experience with developing guidelines. The financial indicators meeting is the 13th, and that's what usually kicks off the guidelines, because that's when the initial projections come. And that will also probably be posted as a finance committee meeting so that we can bring resident members into the meeting itself. So I would probably propose to add that to the finance committee in addition to the council and VCG. VCG means that the school committee and library trustees are also a part of that particular meeting. And then we're moving along into the end of the year work. And so we will add this to the packet for today's meeting, and come back and allow for a discussion next week. But I did want to at least focus on what's anticipated for the 27th and the 3rd. Lynn, you have your hand up. Oh.
And this is really a question for Paul and Athena, but if in fact we have free cash certified before the council meets again, is that an automatic referral to finance?
I
W-
don't
Was,
believe so.
but for what, to what purpose? I mean,
For the
there's no
for
action.
the supplemental.
Yeah, it's only if you're going to use that as a funding source that you need free cash certified. There's no action for the finance committee or the council to take once free cash is
Right.
certified, unless
And
you can do something with it.
Right, and usually once it's certified, you come to us with recommendations for how
Yes.
you want appropriate. Okay, so there's no way that on the that we can start discussing free cash on November 3rd.
Well, there's nothing for the finance to discuss exactly regarding free cash. There will be an update from Holly about the fourth quarter budget and so on. But then the town manager is going to be submitting supplemental budget requests from free cash on the 13th. So
Right,
those will come to the finance committee then. And
right.
we'll have those ahead of the 13th. We'll need to post them by the 9th so the council can act on the 20th.
Right.
So we'll
But
have them
there's
available.
But are those recommendations automatically referred to finance?
I don't believe supplemental budget appropriations are automatically referred. I think it's the levying of taxes. I have to check the rules, but I don't believe so.
Okay.
And it's just as a matter of what our current financial management policies are, is that once free cash is certified, free cash above 5% of the benchmark level is then eligible for transfer, and as it's written, the goal is to get the stabilization funds to 15%, and if the general stabilization fund is at 15% of the benchmark level, then the excess goes into the capital stabilization fund. And I think that's where our current policies are, though a recommendation to do something different is certainly within the authority of the town manager.
Let me also make another observation here, Andy, that I don't believe that we will be ready to make an AHRA recommendation until we know the status of free cash.
Correct. I agree
So
with that. I'm going to stop sharing so we can get back to the regular screen.
okay.
So are there any further questions or comments about that? Because that was going to be the last agenda item and it's now been pretty well disposed of. So I want to spend the rest of our time, if needed, and we don't have to stay till the full 2 hours, but we want to get back to the rental registration. And I think Paul was at the meeting last night, CRC. Was anybody else from the committee at the CRC meeting? So Rob was there. Hi, Rob. And Paul. Do either of you have any comments about the CRC recommendations and the discussion that happened at the CRC meeting?
Well, you saw the recommendations coming out of CRC. They they gave you a lot of information, but tried to simplify the fee structure, because I think in response to some of the questions that were coming from the finance committee, with the bylaw coming out subject to sort of the actual fee schedule, I have sent that along to the town attorney for their review. One of the questions I think that was outstanding was about resident preferential treatment, a discount for residents, and how that could come into play. And just wanted to clarify that with the town attorney. Rob, was there anything?
Just as a follow-up, that the CRC decided that, you know, the 5-year inspection schedule makes the most sense for the program to be successful and effective, and, you know, sticking with that, you know, moved us into the conversation about a simplified fee schedule that it is reasonable and would accomplish collecting the necessary fees to support the program.
And just one other thing was to clarify and to confirm that we did, with the strategic partnership agreement with the university, we do have $100,000 that's available to support this program, because was sort of the intent of some of that funds to support neighborhood issues, and this would be an appropriate use of some of those funds.
Andy, would you like me to put the fee schedule up?
In a minute. Paul, when you said some of the funds from the university, are there other competing or other uses we should be considering when making this calculation?
Not necessarily, because what I'm saying is that you could use the full 100,000, but I don't think when we did the projections we were going to require that entire amount.
So the more you put in, then the less fees possibly could calculate.
Potentially, but yeah. But also, I think what we're there could be other opportunities if there are other over the next 5 years, if there are other needs that pop up. It's nice to have some money available to use if there's things that we would like to see happen in neighborhoods.
I think though, I'm going to ask one more question, and certainly looking for raised hands at any time, because this isn't this is a committee discussion. So please do raise your hands. But one of the things that I had been concerned about for a while, and Rob, you might have some comments on this. What degree of flexibility should the staff have about scheduling in order to accommodate for situations such as turnover in staff, illness of staff, other demands on staff time that might interfere with being able to complete the schedule? Is a rigid schedule really within the best interests of an efficiently managed program?
So yeah, it is a a very structured schedule of inspections over the 5-year period. The plan is to visit 600 dwelling units in any year to accomplish that. The flexibility exists where we have the ability to select the exact number of units we inspect in the larger complexes. So that's not totally defined yet, and we don't have the count on how many units are currently in a housing inspection program by some other agency that we would be taking into account as well. So I think when I put together the estimate for staff needed to accomplish that many inspections, it does account for unknowns. We don't know how many follow-up inspections will necessarily be needed, how many court visits will be needed. So it isn't a 8 to 4 schedule daily of inspections. It's far fewer than that to account for these additional unknowns. So I was comfortable with the number of staff we were suggesting. Now, say it's completely wrong, we find something out that that I wasn't anticipating. The rules and regulations can be modified by the Board of License Commissioners to either change the duration of the inspection or give further flexibility in how often we visit the properties or the number of properties that we visit in any particular year. But I don't anticipate that being the case, and I certainly wouldn't anticipate having to go to Paul just to have him tell me, no, you can't have more inspectors. So I think this was carefully considered to be a program that we could be we could accomplish this and make sure the program is successful.
Thank you. Because I think you just in that last comment addressed us. My concern is whether the bylaw and regulations as proposed would create a rigidity that would force a budget recommendation in and of itself just to accommodate the program. Are there other?
Can I just add one other thing, and when we start this program and we understand how things exist out there, the discussions should be open and continuing, because there might be an opportunity to not have to reinspect properties, or really start to identify those properties that are very well cared for. So there's just so many options on where this could go in the future. So I think these discussions would have to be open, and I would expect to be able to report on what is found once we do get into inspecting the properties. Thanks.
Matt?
Thanks, Andy, and thank you, Rob. I have one programmatic question and then I know we're going to get into the fee structure a little bit, so I'll hold off. But Rob, just to be clear, so my understanding is that if staff have concerns about a building or a complex, that this is what I was told by John, they can file their own complaint and conduct an investigation into that apartment or into that rental. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yes.
Okay, I think that misconception is out there, and I just wanted to clarify it.
Lynn?
Thanks. I'm gonna actually refer to this and also back to the thing we just looked at. Of all of the things that are pending out there that may come to the council before this term is up, I would like to place a high priority on this because it's the kind of thing that I don't want to see a new configuration of CRC and a new configuration of the Finance Committee wrestle with again. And I think it's something I certainly know from the many conversations I've had with residents. This is highly desired in Amherst. It is the only, what we keep hearing is have a bylaw and make sure you can enforce it. And in a district like the one I represent, where we've got a number of student rentals, where the worst problems are mostly in house student rentals, not in complexes. I'm not saying that's all true. I just want to make sure that we move this to the priority level, understanding that it has to go to CRC, it has to go to GOL yet, and it has to come to the council. And is it a zoning? Even if it isn't a zoning, it should have 2 readings at the council level. So I'm putting pressure on keeping it moving fast. I do want to ask, to the extent possible, how much of this has had legal review?
I think there have been conversations with the town attorney early on, but since we've got an actual vote from CRC, this morning that happened last night, so I sent the actual version to town attorney for their review.
Okay. Great, thank you.
There's one issue, and I mean, Rob can add to this, but if we don't complete the work before the end of this council, then I think it becomes more difficult to implement the regulation with the next year as the rental registration year is defined.
Right.
And so that if we can't move it through during this council, then we lose a whole year of being able to implement it.
Exactly.
I see Rob nodding his head yes, so that there's no further need for discussion on that point. And Anna?
Rob, I apologize for my ignorance on this. I know that we have currently a job posting for an inspector, and that is a different role than a code enforcement officer. Is that right? So the reason why I was looking at it, I was thinking about the time that we are in, where it's really hard to find staffing, and just making sure that you feel that as a competitive salary and that will get applicants. And obviously you wouldn't have put it out there if you didn't think it was a competitive salary and we'd get applicants, but I just wanted to confirm that that is different than the posting that's currently out there.
It is. Currently the posting is for a health inspector. A prior health inspector, Ed Smith, ended up taking the position that John left vacant as lead code enforcement officer, and will be at the lead of this program. So currently we're trying to fill the health inspector vacancy, and in the future the position that would be needed for this program is more of a housing, health or building inspector. There's flexibility on the exact background for the individual, and it could go a couple of different ways. So I'm hoping that it's not going to be defined so specifically to a type of inspector that I think we would hopefully be able to generate some interest within our current set of job descriptions that we have.
Okay, yeah, and I think I was asking just mostly because when I was looking at that other, because I was trying to solve my own problem, but when I was looking at it, there was a lot of code enforcement in that job description, and the salary, I wasn't sure if that was, I mean, 55 to 74K a year for that lead inspector role, and so I was trying to do math on, again, ensuring that we're able to pull people into this, because I think what we don't want to have happen, and nobody wants this, including you, is to start this program up and not be able to find anyone to fill the role.
Right, and I do believe it's slightly adjusted from that figure because the union negotiations were completed. So I think that salary range is a little bit higher than what was posted in that earlier
Thank you.
document.
Thanks.
So looking to see if there are other comments to make. Just to say, Lynn, you had talked about hearing a lot from the community about support for doing the rental registration program modifications. I think that what's concerned me when I have heard those comments is that there seems to also be a lot of belief that it's going to solve problems of enforcement of the number of unrelated residents in a property, or some of the noise and other problems that exist with student rental housing from the perception of the people who are making these comments. And neither of those is really something that is an inspection issue. So I just do want to note that for the discussion, but nothing else, because it's not really a topic that affects the question of the fee structure, which is what we're all about. So are there any questions? The last thing I'll pose to the committee, is there any questions about the calculations that were made by CRC that somebody can help us with, or that we want to send back to CRC for further? Anna?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out just some clarity on the inspection fee in the, and this might totally be me missing it, but in the proposed schedule, it says inspection fee 150, and then in the sample, it says 150 plus $50 per unit above one. And I just wanted to confirm, is it a flat fee, or is it variable based on the number of units as the permitting is?
Leave it to first, see if
Like
somebody
Rob might
can.
answer for me, I'm not sure. Yep, so in that document, I wasn't sure if there was going to be an additional fee above it, just because it was highlighted like that. So I just wanted clarity that there was not going to be. That it's a flat fee.
So, can I answer that, Andy?
Yes.
Yeah, my recommendation that we discussed yesterday for the part of the meeting that I was there, and I did miss the end of the discussion, is it is definitely a flat fee, so not a additional per unit fee. And where I see confusion here is that in my discussion, it was $150 per unit. So per unit that's inspected, not per parcel, as that
Okay,
reads in the box.
that makes more sense.
Unless Paul thinks that something else happened after I left. That was my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, we had a public comment during the public comment portion of the meeting. and I made a request that person who offered public comment send her recommendation in writing, and I will share that with the committee when received. So, is there anything else people want to raise today in the way of questions about CRC or Matt?
So just, I mean, this is, I guess, is just my scratch notes on the broad overall cost of the program. And I just want to make sure, Rob and others, that I've got it accurate. So essentially the new program would require us, these are all estimates, but out of CRC's memo, new program would cost us about 474,000. 100,000 of that we're projecting to come from UMass, and the other 374 would come from fee revenue, and that would be a break even on the program. And the current scheme is we have revenue about 293,000, 293.5, and administrative costs of about 150,000. So the current scheme nets us about 143 in revenue to the general fund. So that's just my scratch notes looking at the CRC memo. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate based on the fee schedule adjustment that occurred last year. And there was no change in the program costs at that time because this was still being developed.
Okay. Okay, well, and I'll just, since I've got the floor, I'll just congratulate you on getting somebody into that lead role, because I know it's been a long time coming.
I guess the other thing that I've thought about, so we build this structure as we're talking about, the number of rental properties remains relatively the same. Do we need some projections for years out in order to feel comfortable with what we're recommending? Because the number of inspections may change, but we also know that salaries and other costs will increase. And so it's not, these numbers are not static. They're kind of first year numbers. Should we be thinking out farther as we are analyzing this? I don't know, Paul, if you have anyone.
Yeah, I mean, we
Sean in the prior day.
Of course, I guess I say that daily. Yeah, we can certainly do that. I think that it's modeled on an annual basis, but some of the costs on impact on property owners, if you see it's modeled on a 5-year plan because that's how it's being implemented. So if you see on the screen, the third column over says proposed total application fees over 5 years. There is a 5-year projection included in this.
Were there adjustments made to the cost side, since this is the revenue side?
I don't think there were. I think that's sort of, there'd be the 2% or 3%, whatever we wind up with. That would go every year.
Yeah.
And that's why I like having a little bit of flex in the not allocating all of the money from the strategic partnership agreement. That allows us to manage some of that.
Yeah, because if my calculation is correct, the first year would be the 67,540 plus the 22,519, which is $90,059. If that is right, if that thinking is right, then there's about $10,000 that is actually unexpended from that amount in the first year. Okay. I don't think we have anything else at this point. I think that the committee needs some time to digest this and then come back and think about the what our next steps are, and I will forward Ms. Shepherd's recommendation to us, which we can then take her numbers and see what that does when you start plugging it in. Don't really have much else that I feel comfortable saying until I have more of a sense of that, and I had time to study it myself a little bit more. So does anyone have anything else that they would like to raise on the subject of the rental registration at this point? Paul?
Yeah, so if there are people who have comments or suggestions or specific questions, we'd really appreciate getting them in advance so we can look at them, have time to look at them. So, I mean, are you driving towards a vote on next Friday, Andy?
I don't necessarily assume that we are, but we've allowed ourselves, I think, 3-meeting flexibility on this.
Okay.
But I think your point still remains the same, that if anybody has any ideas, don't wait until next Friday. Go ahead and send them in earlier. And that would be helpful. I guess as long as they get to Paul and Athena and me, I think that would be the best way to do it. If you just send additional comments or questions to the 3 of us, and then it'll allow Paul and Athena to sort out the questions to the appropriate person who can help them the best. So with that said, and getting back to our agenda, we've talked about schedule of next meetings and work plan, which was item number 6, which then brings us to topics that were not anticipated when we put together the agenda. Wondering if anybody from the committee, I have no additional topics. If nobody from the committee has any additional topics, I think that we have managed to beat our 2-hour goal. So thank you, and we'll follow through with next week's meeting.
Great. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks, Andy. Bye,
care.
everybody.
Bye.